Hey everybody, Thomas here again with another Mosaic training video, and this one will be the wrap-up video for our linear periodization series. So we are done with the whole training plan, thankfully, and now we can actually go through and see kind of what worked, what didn't work, maybe who would benefit from this kind of program, and just overall takeaways and whatnot. So just as a reminder, the basic structure of the plan was a pretty standard linear periodization type plan, where we broke it up into chunks of kind of 4 weeks. So we did 4 weeks of hypertrophy, where we do things like repeaters and a lot of traditional lifts for volume. So lots of getting pumped for sure. And then we did 1 week of deload, and a lot of people will say this, but it's important to reiterate that these deload weeks shouldn't ever be total rest. These ones were the weeks where I would go in maybe half the volume in terms of climbing time, do a few of the same workouts that I would do during the phase itself, maybe at a little bit less intensity or a bit less volume, but just kind of maintaining a little bit, but giving the body a bit more rest to recover. So after that hypertrophy phase, we did a strength mesocycle, and in this we did things like one-arm hangs, no hangs, a lot of like traditional climbing workouts that you'll see, a lot of hangboarding stuff, and then other slightly more climbing specific lifts like weighted pull-ups and stuff like that to kind of round things out. Then another deload week, and then we did this final power mesocycle. So this was a lot of campus boarding and a few explosive movement type workouts, but not nearly as much weight room stuff. And now that we're done, we're kind of in this quote peaking phase where all the things should hopefully come together and result in this kind of final culmination. So the idea there being that hypertrophy, gaining muscle, is very tough to do. It takes a long time to gain that muscle, but it also takes a long time to lose it. So the ordering that we had here, where we did some hypertrophy, leading into strength, leading into power, was ordered, consciously in terms of hypertrophy being the thing that takes the longest to lose, then our strength, and then our power. So hopefully, everything's kind of topped up in the peaking phase. We'll see later that might not be totally true. Okay, so one thing that will be a good way to frame this is to go over the final results. So taking the pre-training plan assessment, comparing it to the post, and we can kind of see how much of a difference it made. So let's just go down the list. So the first two are the traditional kind of one-arm hangs that we do. If you haven't seen the assessment video, there's an in-depth one just going over all the different things that we're doing, and I'll put a link in the video here. So for this one, this first one, the 20 mil half crimp hang, it's a bummer. I don't know why, but I've been having a lot of difficulty with this hang in the assessments recently. So you can see pre-workout, pre-training plan, we had body weight minus 8 pounds, so I was holding on to a pulley that on the other hand had 8 pounds on it. And now after, I was struggling pretty hard even with body weight taking off 12 pounds. So it's a bummer, it's a regression. I mentioned it in the power video, but I feel like these hangs are a lot more condition dependent and finicky than I might have thought before in terms of being a good assessment. And maybe it's the edge that I'm using, or something like that. Maybe it'd be better to do something different. But anyway, sticking with it, gonna be consistent here. The good thing is the 3-finger drag hang, the one arm, did get better. Finally got up to body weight taking 15 pounds off. So that felt good. It's starting to feel less tweaky. That's always kind of the limiting factor for me, is probably neurological. Just it feels like something's gonna blow in my wrist. So I don't give it the full beans, as they say. The micro crimp hang, that little 6mm edge, improved up to 8 seconds. Again, this one's finicky too. This one you can understand why it's finicky, just condition dependent on those micro crimps. Um, but I've definitely had hangs in the strength phase, just in a training day, that were better than this even. So I'm glad it shows improvement in the assessment, but I think it improved more than even this number shows. The sloper hang is getting better. Again, I've mentioned this many times, but the my Beastmaker hangboard, it just feels like it's still breaking in, even though I've had it for a long time. I guess I just haven't used those 45s as much. But in the gym, when I use the one that's kind of ironically greased up, but in the case of the Beastmaker, I think it makes it a bit stickier. I can hang for a decent chunk of time on the 45s. But on mine, got up to 2 seconds, and that's about it. Um, the front lever got a little bit better. We'll talk about this later, but I had other assessments that were even better than this. But at this point, I was able to only hold the 9 second mark. For one arm pull-ups, those stayed the same. Again, same as the front lever. In a previous assessment, they were better, and now they're a little bit worse. 90-degree lock-offs, same story. This time they just felt kind of bad. Those always just feel like my shoulder either feels nice and tight and strong, or it feels like it's a bit weak and I kind of lose that tension. Um, Campus boarding maintained the same. It's pretty hard for me to improve on campus boarding. I'm pretty happy to just get back to that 7.5. The one time I did it before the training plan felt like a bit of a fluke. So I'm glad I could make it feel a little bit more consistent now. The other campus test, where going from the first rung to as high as you can, and then back to the first rung, did improve a little bit. I mentioned again in the power episode, but that coming back down felt kind of violent, and after working specifically the power phase, that felt a lot better. Stretching has improved quite a bit. It's funny how much, like, I wasn't even being that diligent about it, but just trying to do it as much as I could, especially the forward fold. I don't know why, but I've always felt like it would be really satisfying to have a comfortable, deep forward fold. So I've been training that a little bit more, even though it's probably not nearly as helpful in terms of climbing as working on your hip flexibility. But anyway, that has improved quite a bit. And in case you're looking for workouts to do that, the thing that really helped me was a weighted forward fold. So I would hold, in my case, it was usually a 35-pound dumbbell, and just do a forward fold with bent knees and also with straight legs. So kind of like moving in and out of straight legs while I was in under tension. And those were nice because I could do them kind of between sets in the weight room. So while I'm resting, could just get some of that stuff in. But that is very satisfying to make gains there. And then the straddle, same kind of deal. I wasn't working on it quite as diligently, but I did make improvements there. Okay, so that is how it went. So in terms of the kind of review of the actual training plan, the things that worked well, that I liked about it anyway, was that each block gave me time to really focus on each of the aspects I was working on. In terms of the strength phase and the finger strength specifically, that was probably a negative because it led to me overtraining, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But for things like campusing, there's a bit of a technique involved, and you sort of figure it out a little bit, and the body position that you want to use. And for things like hypertrophy, you just need more time. It just takes a long time to build muscle like that. So anyway, that part was nice. Having a whole phase dedicated to hypertrophy was nice because I could really push it, try a lot of different stuff, try to fix some imbalances that I might have had, or some specifically weak points that I have, where I was able to work on those. So all of these are kind of in the same vein, as you can see. And then the final one, just having a consistent workout that you did basically every time, for the whole block, the 4 weeks, was nice, just because you kind of knew what you're gonna do when you went to the gym or to the weight room or whatever, and you didn't have to go back and remember, like, oh yeah, what is Monday? It's Monday, deadlifting, or what is it? So anyway, it was easy to plan for and execute, basically. All right, for the cons, that last thing I mentioned about the consistency is a bit of a double-edged sword in terms of the fact that it is kind of boring. You're doing the same thing over and over again, and if you don't like that, then it's definitely a bad thing. I definitely got bored with doing that kind of stuff. The Especially in the hypertrophy and to a lesser extent the strength portion of the plan, the non-climbing aspects of the workout, so the weight room type workouts, took much longer than I thought they would. They took away from the climbing time, and I think that's a pretty big deal. And I think that that's definitely a major con. Again, especially for working hypertrophy, upper body hypertrophy, not necessarily the forearm stuff. Um, like I mentioned before, I definitely overtrained my fingers. I think it was quite a bit of hubris involved there, where I thought I was pretty much set in terms of that portion of the training. That was what I had the most experience with. I felt pretty comfortable with knowing how much I could take, and in this case, it just wasn't true. So I definitely need to go back and reevaluate what happened there. But it's a pretty like textbook case of overtraining where I peaked after probably 2 weeks, and I had like an amazing workout, and then from then on, it just got worse and worse and worse, and it just felt worse too. Uh, so that's why, as we saw, the assessment wasn't very good, but I definitely had a point where I was doing much better. Um, in terms of again, kind of the flip side of the coin from the pro of having time to get into the groove and learn the exercises, it also gives your body quite a bit of a chance to get into this state of accommodation. So where your body kind of has figured out the movement, you make the big gains that you can early already, and then you kind of just start to stagnate in terms of your progress. So I think for a lot of things that is definitely a con, probably for the finger stuff especially. But we'll see. I think I'm enough of a noob in terms of the upper body, big muscle training, that I don't think I reached that point of accommodation. Maybe in a couple exercises, but for the finger stuff, I definitely did. One of the things that really hit and shows in the final assessment is even though the idea behind this linear periodization is you're stacking these different training aspects that theoretically will degrade in the proper order. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, hypertrophy takes longest to make gains in, but it takes the longest to lose those gains. But even though in theory that works out, I definitely noticed my strength just was not there after even the 4 weeks of power. So going back to the assessment, you can see it looks okay here because it's all green. I made some improvements, but in terms of the comparison to the strength phase assessment, it was definitely a negative. So things like front lever went down, a lot of just body tension stuff. One arm pull up went down from that strength assessment. The lock off, all of that stuff, and it's pretty much what you would expect to be the strength specific aspects of the assessment. Kind of took a nosedive even after that not terribly long period of 4 weeks of power. So anyway, that's definitely something I want to keep in mind for the next version of the training plan. And then finally, you have this kind of narrow peaking window. For me, I mean, peaking is kind of a bit of a generous term, as we saw from the assessment, but even if everything worked to plan, you have this sort of 2 to 4 week period where you're supposed to be in tip-top shape, and I guess you just go out and do all your projects during that point. But that is definitely a con, especially for people who kind of want to climb all the time, and don't want to have these windows only where they're at their best. Okay, so in terms of that, like who might actually want to use this type of structure, if you are a person who doesn't necessarily climb all the time, but you have kind of, a week trip or 2 week trips here and there throughout the year, uh, especially ones that you know you're going to go on ahead of time. So one group that I've heard this works well for, like teachers who have a whole summer off and who can plan these big trips around that, knowing that they're going to have a big break. So I think if you're that kind of climber, this would work pretty well because you could really plan it ahead, and kind of work toward that trip that you know you're going on. The other group that I think will benefit from this, and I think this is a good reason, even though I'm a bit down on this type of plan right now personally, but I think it's helpful for me to have gone through it, is that if you haven't done structured training in a while and you might need to like have this jumpstart period where you remember how to train, you remember kind of what workouts you like, what you don't, how to campus. If I haven't done it in a while, it feels kind of weird and it takes a minute to get back into that coordination. This is a good way to do it because you have that time to go through and kind of hone the workouts that you're doing and your technique on those individual exercises during the phase itself. You don't have to like do a test phase and then go through and do it again. And this is similar. If you haven't trained at all much before this, and you need to focus on that kind of stuff, like I mentioned, campusing or the aspects of hangboarding that you might need to look at. Okay, so the final takeaways from this. So in terms of the plan itself, I think it has its place. It has people that would benefit from it. But I don't think I will do this structure again unless, like I mentioned, maybe I have a big break from training for whatever reason and have to come back. I think I would tend to move away from this linear version of a training program. But for me, like for this specific instance of the program, I don't know if I have seen the effects of overtraining, especially overtraining my fingers in this case, as much as I have in this instance. It was crazy to me how long it took to recover. I thought, okay, I did pretty badly that workout. Maybe I'll take a couple of days off, come back, next workout will be fine. Like no, it just kind of kept going down and down, and I think I probably needed a big break in order to recover from that if I wanted to, like during the strength phase. And also personally, I think I'm still trying too hard during the training phase. I think I really need to figure out a way mentally to kind of disconnect the idea of performance during one of these training periods and kind of compartmentalize, think of training as training. Don't worry if you're, making these crazy gains or if you want to like PR or whatever, and think of the performance aspect as being the actual climbing. That's something, again, I mentioned Yves Gravel quite a bit, but he talks about this quite a bit, that he trains his fingers especially very often, but not at a crazy high limit. And I always wind up running into the issue of starting like that, but then progressively adding load as I'm going and still thinking like, oh, it feels pretty easy. It's not a big deal. I can go up again. And then suddenly you're at your limit and you're like, I just gotta break through and continue at this, even though it felt easy last week maybe, and it doesn't feel as easy right now. So I think it's a bit of ego going on there with the training, and it's helpful to remind yourself to separate that. So in terms of a plan in general, it worked, as you saw from the assessment. Like I did make progress from the beginning to the end, but it was a lot of work that went into it for not quite as much progress as I had hoped. So a lot of time taken doing boring things, in the weight room when I'd rather just be up climbing. And I think because of that, I'd probably give it, a B minus. It worked, if let's say like a C or C minus or something were a plan was a plan that like didn't do anything, you just maintained and nothing got better. This worked to a decent extent. Um, but like I mentioned, it's not my favorite structure to use, so I think in the future I might not use it. All right, so that was the linear periodization kind of test, and I'm glad I went through it. It's going to be a very good benchmark for future training plan structures, just because this one's a pretty common one that people have tried. Like I mentioned, because it is, I don't know, so involved, you're doing quite a bit. Uh, Knowing how much gain you get kind of per uh, whatever measurement of effort you put into it is kind of helpful to know. So anyway, as a good benchmark, linear periodization was probably the best first training plan to go over. And I think next time we'll go over more of a conjugate method, which will hopefully be a little bit more interesting. So anyway, thanks very much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you kind of in the next training plan prep video. All right, see you all.